Hello and welcome to the David Icke videocast. Well, I'm back home very briefly in the European tour. Got one more date, which is next week in Amsterdam, and then immediately I'm heading out to Glasgow and Newcastle and Swansea and Cardiff and Watford and Torquay and Crewe and Margate, and then finishing here on the Isle of Wight on December 14th. And what you see when you travel as much as I do to so many different places is that the voices that scream through the microphones and dominate the microphones do not reflect the views of the vast majority of people who never see a microphone. And what people want is enough money for a decent life. They want peace, and they want the ability to say what they think and have their own opinion without being met with this tidal wave of abuse, and even, increasingly, losing their job for their opinions. Now that description is of a fascist, communistic tyranny. And that is what the so-called free world is so fast becoming. One of the things that I talk about in this speaking tour is a concept of mine, which is know the outcome and you'll see the journey. And what I mean by that is if you don't know what the outcome is planned to be, then it's just a series of random events happening in the world. But if you know what the outcome is meant to be, then those random events very clearly become the stepping stones, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, towards that outcome. So, what is the outcome in terms of information and freedom of expression that is desired by this global network or global web that I've been exposing for 30 years? Well, this is the outcome. That the point will arrive far quicker than anyone can imagine now, although they're starting to get an idea. The point will come when the only information that anyone receives will be that which the hidden hand and its establishment wants people to see. Straight out of 1984. And that is now increasingly possible because of algorithms that are not only censoring after the point of delivery, after you post. The technology is being developed. In truth, it already exists. It's just a matter of finding the excuse to play it out, where algorithms will actually stop the posting before anyone sees it. And this is why, systematically, the information that people receive about everything has been concentrated and concentrated and concentrated more and more and more on the internet, where algorithms can apply. And so these mainstream media journalists, often what pass for them, who kind of support the censorship that's going on now of people with a different view will themselves be subject, like the inverted, progressive, non-progressive, regressive mob and Twitter stormers. They will be subject to the very censorship structure that they're now cheering and whooping and clapping into existence. And so what we're seeing daily almost are the stepping stones, the totalitarian tiptoe towards this point where people will never see any information that is not accepted by the establishment and agreed that people can see it. Every other view will be silenced and eventually subject to the law. Many views already are. And once you censor before the point of delivery, you are dealing in a tyranny. For this reason, there are laws against incitement to violence. There are laws against incitement to terrorism. There are laws against incitement to so many of these acts of violence and encouraging people to do unpleasant things. But those laws apply after the point of delivery. And what that situation means is that no one, no authority has the ability, the right, the power to decide what people see and what people don't see. Once you start censoring before the point of delivery, which is what's increasingly happening now and what they want to happen on a vast scale before too long. Zuckerberg's talking about it, and others, like this ludicrous British politician, Damien Green, who has absolute contempt for freedom of speech, using fake news to justify, or the label of it, to justify censorship. What they are doing is calling for censorship before the point of delivery. And once you have that, then you're in a tyranny. Because now the authority has the power to decide what you see and what you don't see. And what happens, of course, and this is what we've seen, is that the reasons for censorship just go on being added to. So we start off with, we must stop anyone posting calls for terrorism and holy war. And a lot of people, this is how it works, get them in, then pull them along, pull the old fishing line in. And a lot of people will go, well, yeah, that's fair enough. But don't stop there. That's just the foot in the door. Then it's, oh, we must stop fake news, which, if you notice, came out of nowhere and was suddenly everywhere, which is always a red flag and flashing red lights. Well, yeah, it's fake news. Well, the mainstream media has been putting out fake news since it was created, and it still is every day, minute by minute, 24/7. Is that a problem? No. It will be eventually when they get pulled in, but for now, no, not a problem, no. But people who are challenging that official narrative and exposing it with facts, that's fake news. Oh, we've got to stop fake news. So, okay. No calls for terrorism. No fake news. Hate speech. That's another one. Hate speech. What's hate speech? Whatever we decide that it is. And not only is this idea of hate speech, which overwhelmingly is anyone with a different opinion that the establishment doesn't want in its progressive, illiberal mob rails against. So not only is hate speech another step on the road, another reason, excuse made up to censor freedom of expression, but it itself moves along a road of expansion. So more and more things are called hate speech. And we've just had the most extraordinary decision by the European Court of Human Rights, which decided that hurting someone's religious feelings is more important than freedom of speech. So some people, unfortunately, I feel for them, I think they're sad, will feel that their feelings have been hurt about their religion. Whatever anyone says, so they'll always find a reason. Oh, you're hurt. You can't question religion. You can't question its historical basis. You can't question what it says. Because you'll always find someone who'll be, my feelings are hurt by that. And therefore, what it means is that freedom of speech is dead once someone being offended is considered more important than freedom of speech. Because you'll always find someone, not just about religion, about anything, to be offended by anything. And people are being encouraged all the time to be offended by more and more things. And once being offended trumps freedom of speech, then freedom of speech is dead. And one thing about religion, if your religion has validity, it will survive criticism. It will survive even abuse. It will survive ridicule. I've been through all of them. I constantly go through all of them. I've survived somehow. I wonder how. By not giving a shit, basically. But if your religion does not have validity, or you feel it doesn't really, if you're honest with yourself, then that's a religion that requires censorship. And so we have moved incessantly along this dark and dangerous road where more and more reasons are being invented to censor speech. Because if you want this outcome, which is that people eventually only ever hear what the establishment, the hidden hand, and its political lackeys want you to hear, then freedom of speech has to go, because freedom of speech is the freedom to speak and thus the freedom to challenge, question, and expose the official narrative. You don't want that. You can't have your outcome if you have freedom of speech. So more and more excuses are made to take it away. And there's another one, of course. Conspiracy theorists. He's a conspiracy theorist. Ban him. It's the new blasphemy. Questioning. Breathe, Dave. Questioning whether the establishment, with a lifelong history of lying to us by the hour, questioning whether they're lying about what they claim happened in events, which they have used as excuses to push us along this road of tyranny, step by step, that is bad. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's bad. And he's white. And he's male. He's horrible. What happened to sexism and racism? Oh, it doesn't apply. Okay, gotcha. So, we now have the anti-establishment progressives and their supporters in the media condemning people as conspiracy theorists and having conspiracy theories when those terms came into widespread use because of the CIA, who contacted in the 1960s major media organizations. The documents are there to see, and urged them to use the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists to discredit those that were questioning the official story of the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. You know, those complete nutters that didn't buy the fact that a single magic bullet went through several people turning at crazy angles. Or that a president who was clearly from the Zapruder film, taken by an onlooker, was hit in the forehead, was hit by a bullet that somehow came from behind. Nutters! How can anyone not accept that? It's obviously true. So that's where conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists came from. And now we have these anti-establishment. Anti-establishment, they're doing everything the establishment wants. We have these anti-establishment people and the media just using the same terms to discredit and to censor that were put out originally by the CIA. So these different excuses go on and on and on and on, and the end of this road is that you won't see anything that the establishment doesn't want you to see. And eventually, like I say, these shrill voices that hog the microphones, that shout racist, Nazi, bigot, they will be subject to the same censorship as these reasons go on from a structure that they are now creating or helping to create. And this week has been a bad one for freedom of speech. What has been happening more and more blatantly is that the establishment internet giants that are just fronts for the hidden hand to control the flow of information and to censor it, like Facebook and Twitter and Google, YouTube. They have been censoring in the most obvious and blatant manner. I mean, they don't seem to care if people know now. Censoring people who are challenging the official narrative. And they're using all these terms, fake news and political correctness and hate speech. And oh, God, it's pathetic. And so there's been a reaction against that, because people who do believe in freedom of speech and do get off their arse and don't just talk about it, have sought to create other social media platforms that do not censor, to get around this establishment internet giant censorship. One of them was called Gab. And of course, what is happening, and you can see it very clearly, you know those kind of fairground game things where you have a hammer and heads keep coming up through holes, and the idea is you hit the head as they come up. Well, that's what's happening. I mean, you couldn't get much more symbolic of what's happening. So the idea is this outcome. No one sees anything that the establishment doesn't want you to see. And thus you censor towards that outcome with your internet giants, but then other people say, hold on a minute, we're going to find other platforms, we're going to create other platforms where we can get around this. So that's a head sticking up through the hole. You got to bang it if you want that outcome. And that's what's happening with Gab. We had this horrific shooting in Pittsburgh at the Jewish synagogue. That was horrific enough, surely. But no, these manipulators, these destroyers of freedom of speech, actually have the psychopathic coldness and callousness to look at the horror of that shooting and then think, how can we make political capital out of this? How can we use it, use the people involved and what's happened to them to advance our agenda of censorship? I mean, it's sickening beyond comprehension that anyone could have that thought process, but they do all the time, and they have with this. So because the man who they have arrested for this had a page on Gab, immediately all these moral corporations, oh, they're moral, they care about humanity, they're not ripping people off. PayPal cut off Gab immediately. You had their host, internet host, said, you got, what, 2 days, was it? Not long, and then we're pulling you. All these other corporations, these moralistic corporations who've tried to give Gab a hard time, Apple and Google and all these people, all expressions of this web of deceit, have been targeting and trying to undermine and now taking down a social media platform akin to Twitter that was saying we won't censor. Oh, but he had a page on Gab. Hold on. What about this bloke who's been arrested, and he denies it so far anyway, for these so-called pipe bombs that were clearly not meant to go off? Pipe bombs, by the way, that had timers in them. What? Timers? In a package you put through the post? How do you know when the person you're targeting, or alleged to be targeting, is going to pick it up? Package bombs don't have timers. They're primed to go off when you open them. But anyway, this guy was posted on Twitter and Facebook. Okay, all these other shooters through the years who have been posting on Facebook and Twitter and involved with Google. Consequences for them? Nothing. You know why? Because they are the censors. They are doing what this hidden hand wants. Algorithmically censoring alternative thought and opinion. Gab wasn't. And so it has to be taken down. And you have the pathetic sight of young people And people that call themselves progressive and liberal, my God, you must be joking. And the pathetic media cheering that Gab has been taken down, while they're seeing their own freedom disappear. But they're not bright enough to see it. Oh, but he had a page on Gab, and then he did that. Freedom of speech means freedom of speech. And the fact that he had a page on Gab, well, that made him go and do that. These other shooters posted on Twitter and Facebook, that made them do what they did. It's ludicrous. Of course it's ludicrous. Because it's not about what they're claiming. Anyone with a brain sunlight active duty see that? I'm sure. It's about censorship. And eventually, progressive virtue signalling, heart on the sleeve, up their own arse. People, it will be your freedom that disappears. And by then, it will be too late. I've quoted people in my latest book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, from Sweden. Progressives who said, open the borders, it doesn't matter, we don't have to check who's coming in, open the borders, look at my virtue signalling. And some of those women have had to leave areas they lived in because the Sharia thought police, religious police, were giving them hassle when they went out for the clothes they were wearing in their own country. This is how naivety can become fatal to freedom. And what's happening now is the attacks on freedom of speech are getting around the United States First Amendment, which people think guarantees freedom of speech. It doesn't. This is what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Note the wording. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The way they are getting round that, the way the hidden hand is getting round that, is by not introducing laws via Congress to take away freedom of speech, but doing it through their internet giant corporations and other media corporations who are censoring freedom of speech without Congress voting for it. That's why they're getting around it. And eventually they'll target the First Amendment itself, you watch. But so what you're having, therefore, is politicians demanding that these internet information giants censor because of hate speech, because of fake news. And they're getting around the First Amendment because they're not actually having a vote on it to do it, but they're telling the corporations to do it on their behalf, which is the same thing. I mean, it's just laughing in the face of the First Amendment. Then you've got people like Damian Green in Britain, who is using fake news to justify censorship. And on and on and on and on it goes. And this is not where it's meant to end. Where it's meant to end is that outcome, where no one sees anything that the establishment doesn't agree that they can see. And I'm reminded, ironically, given the mentality driving this in the public arena, call themselves anti-fascists. Reminded of the words of that German pastor after the Second World War. First they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I did nothing. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, so I did nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That is the process we are now going through, that we are now seeing unfold by the day. And if progressives, especially young progressives, want to live in a world in which they are free to have their opinion, then they need to get their heads round this sequence that's going on pretty damn quick. How about now? Will they? My breath I am not holding.